I remember this time in the supermarket, there was nothing available except for seaweed.
Okay.
That was it.
Great.
So
Wow.
empty shelves,
Yep.
a little bit like what maybe people experienced about 4 years ago or so. And we're quite upset about the fact that there was a lack of X in
Yep.
that supermarket. That was common for people growing up in the Soviet Union.
Today, our guest is Stan Zaslavsky. Stan is a migrant to Australia, escaped his home country of Georgia due to the Civil War in the early 1990s. In 1991, aged just 13, he moved with his family to what he describes as the lucky country. Stan is the founder of Eagle Vision. There, he has created a cohesive and diverse team across multiple continents that develop 3D architectural visualisations for leading property developers, architects, real estate agents across Australia. Stan possesses an insatiable drive for self-improvement across all facets of his life: business, well-being, health and fitness, finance and family. He seeks the best advice from the world of books, coaches and mentors, and freely shares his learnings with his team, friends, family and public seminars. Through determination, rigorous planning and support from his wife and 2 teenage daughters, Stan is on track to complete his current goal of completing an Ironman event within the next 5 years. Stan, welcome to Tales from the Top.
Thank
Welcome,
you very
Stan.
much. Thanks, Jake, and thanks, Lee.
Can we start? Can you tell us a bit about what it was like to grow up in Georgia in the late 80s?
Yeah, look, thank you. It was a really interesting time. So, for those that don't know, Georgia is a very tiny little country of about 5 million people all up. It borders Black Sea onto the west, Turkey to the south, and the big brother Russia to the north. So that has created a kind of an interesting dynamic for that little country because over the decades and generations, basically a whole bunch of nomadic tribes had gathered together at some point of time and took one mountain, the other one took another mountain. And so they kind of decided, hey, this is a nice little spot and we're going to raise our families and so forth from here. So that kind of developed into progressively being conquered by many, many different civilizations over the thousands of years that followed. And the most recent was the Russian sort of federation coming over the Caucasus Mountains in the early 1800s. They came through, imposed their will like they typically do, because that was the way for them to create some strategic barriers between themselves and what was happening in the Middle East. And so the Georgian people themselves are a combination of roughly about 20 different nationalities. So in a country of 5 million, imagine having 20 different nationalities, lots of dialects, but they're all kind of Georgian. There's a mixture of Ossetians, Abkhazians, Azeris, and Georgians, and also Greeks that had come through when they were being driven out from Turkey, and Armenians, and all kinds of, it's basically a big melting pot. And it was an amazing place to grow up in because we had so many different nationalities and so many different cultures mixing in together that there was food from Middle East, there was food from Russia, there was food from Europe, all kinds of places. And so growing up there was really fun. Georgia prides itself on good wine and hospitality. So there aren't very many natural resources. The only real resource is the Black Sea with the resorts. They've got the mountains for ski resorts. So that was kind of the extent of its ability to trade and provide products and services, I suppose, to people around. It was also on the side of the trade route. So the Indian spice route went through Georgia up to Europe. So we had the advantage of all kinds of spices coming through that. So lots of food, lots of different kinds of food. It was amazing. So that was that. When Soviet Union was formed, for those that haven't experienced it, Georgia became kind of the prize spot of the entire union because one of the leaders, Joseph Stalin, had come from Georgia. So Georgia was always held in a bit of an esteemed spot because of that. And during times when things were tough, in the early 1930s, in the 1950s, Georgia always seemed to have an abundance of food. The other parts of Soviet Union were in a much tougher spot. But at the same time, we did have times when because that was just the way of life. When we wanted something, either somebody had to get it in whichever way it was possible. And the Communist Party typically had, or the members of that Communist Party typically had access to everything. Common population barely had much. In order to get a fridge, one had to be in a queue. In order to get a television, one had to be in a queue. Wow. These queues may last for years.
Okay.
Wow.
That's not what I was
So it's not almost lunchtime and I still haven't got my fridge.
Yes. These were allocations.
Yeah.
In order to get a flat, one had to be in a queue. So growing up there was a pretty tough little spot to be. However, still within all of that tough area, Georgia still had an access to things, whether it was through the black market or through other means. But we never felt shortage as such. There was a time, however, when I remember this time in the supermarket, there was nothing available except for seaweed.
Okay.
That was it.
Great.
So empty shelves, a little bit like what maybe people experienced about 4 years ago or so. And we're quite upset about the fact that there was a lack of X in that supermarket. That was common for people growing up in the Soviet Union. So it was just the nature of the beast that there was an abundance of seaweed. It was canned seaweed. And so Mum made up recipes out of seaweed. Soup and this and dessert and whatever came.
And how long would have that lasted for, that period?
It's hard to say, but things did get progressively worse.
Okay.
Probably from around the time of the mid-1980s, I'd say, towards the fall of the Soviet Union, things were getting tougher. Okay. I do remember that quite clearly. Before that, we were in a fairly fortunate kind of place because my grandparents had migrated from Ukraine over to Georgia. So there was a time when, and you've got to understand the logic of that sort of country where in order to create a production pipeline, different areas were allocated for production of different elements. So Georgia was a processing area for steel. So maybe iron ore was taken out somewhere in Ukraine, delivered down to Georgia, it was processed, then it was sent on to another part. And so what the communist organization did, they sent a whole bunch of engineers from Ukraine down to Georgia to establish these kind of things. And again, it was imposition onto this country that had had a very proud background and history to now say, all right, now you're going to be doing this. There was no questions. Everybody had to learn Russian. Wow. Georgian is a language of its own, dates back 5,000 years with its own alphabet, with its own everything.
So you had how many languages were the 20 different cultures that made up Georgia? Was that an evolution of a common language as a result of those, or was it one dominant language from one of those 20 groups? And when you left, were there still people who spoke two languages, Russian and a native tongue from wherever they came from?
So Georgian was the dominant language, basically. The alphabet that was developed, it's actually quite similar to the Armenian alphabet, which is a neighboring country. And so everybody spoke the same language, albeit with a different dialect. Right. So they could kind of understand each other, but it'd be similar to maybe Mandarin and Cantonese, where it's a little bit different, but they kind of can get what they're talking about. Yeah. So, but imagine this in a concentrated area of... It's a tiny little country. It's less than maybe a tenth the size of South Australia.
Right.
So geographically.
Wow. Okay.
So everybody's on top of each other.
Yeah. So probably make it about the size of Ireland.
Possibly.
Yeah. The UK fits into
something
South
like
Australia
that.
About 2.5 times. So something around that size.
Yeah.
I'm trying to visualize the city. What does it look like?
Today's episode is sponsored by us, Chiron Audio and Devison Design.
At Chiron, we enrich people's lives with music systems that create lifelike three-dimensional images that evoke real emotional responses and allow true connection to recorded music. With our strategic partners, we can help you create the ultimate environment to enjoy your Chiron music system. From interior design guidance through to an entire bespoke listening room, we can assist you to bring your dream to life. Life is better with music, and music is better with Chiron.
Devison Design creates luxury garage environments for the discerning automotive collector, preserving your collection in surroundings that are more gallery than garage, and so enhancing the value of your enjoyment. With projects across Australia and Europe, Devison Design provides design services worldwide. Truly bespoke garages start with inspiring designs. Let Devison Design inspire you.
To get in touch with one of our principals directly, visit our website chironaudio.com.au or devisondesign.com.au to book a consultation.
And now on with the show.
So I grew up in a city called Rustavi. So Rustavi is a little town, about 300,000 people, about an hour away from the capital of Georgia called Tbilisi. And Tbilisi translates to warm water because there's a river that runs through it, and it's quite mountainous, so very hilly, lots of these little things. But again, you're going back 5,000 years of development, and so some houses would have been standing there for hundreds of years. There are some areas that haven't even been excavated, and I'm sure there's archaeological digs of all kinds of civilizations that were there before in that part of the world. So it was a fascinating little place to grow up in, with a very rich history of food, and at the same time had it's kind of an imposition of, okay, now we're all part of the Soviet Union.
So architecturally, what does it look like? If you were to, there's another city around that we could visualize.
Yeah. So there's a massive influence from Turkey.
Okay.
Because the Ottoman Empire would have stretched right through Georgia. And at the same time, there's ancient civilizations that would have come through from Syria and Iraq and Iran and Israel and all of those kind of parts of the world that would have flown through there because of the spice route.
Of course.
So some architecture is quite European because of the French influence that was coming through Russia. Some architectural stuff is unique because of its own sort of language. Quite a lot of timber in terms of construction, quite a lot of clay. The country itself, because of its topography, it doesn't really allow for a very standard type of build. So everything is custom.
Right.
And you can kind of imagine perhaps some of the islands of, Fiji and those kind of places where people just put things together by themselves. A little bit of that was in Georgia because there wasn't really any kind of law as such. And if somebody wanted to build a house, they'd build a house, perhaps without much architectural understanding of how that house gets to be built.
As long as it stands up.
Pretty much.
And it functions as a space to keep you warm, safe and dry.
Yeah, absolutely. But and then as obviously progressed, there was an influence of new suburbs being built in the style of the rest of the Soviet Union, where there were 5-6-story walk-ups, blocks of apartments. They were called Khrushchevki. So it was a particular political leader at the time that said, okay, we're going to standardize all residential apartment dwellings. So they were all the same. And a lot of them had common amenity. So kitchens were shared, toilets, bathrooms were shared. Here are a couple of bedrooms. And when we're talking about apartments, a family of 4 would have 2 rooms. So
Is that what you grew up in?
We were quite lucky because of one set of grandparents that had gained a higher position in the steel mill. And because of that, they were living in a 4-bedroom flat. In that 4-bedroom flat, there were my grandparents, my parents, my auntie, her husband. So that's 6. And then I came along, and then my sister came along, and then my auntie's daughter. No, I think by the time my auntie's daughter was born, we'd already moved out into another flat in the capital city. So, growing up, it was just normal that everybody's on top of each other, and that's just how it is. Yeah.
Wow. And that in that facility, were you sharing bathrooms with the whole?
We had our own.
Had your own.
By that time, we had our own. And I'm sure my grandparents could have told stories of when they were living in commonly shared things. But yeah, you just have to understand that Soviet Union, the way it was meant, the socialist kind of attitude was everything is shared, everyone's equal, although not everyone's equal, as we all know. But for the majority of populace, that's what it was like. And due to the restrictions, people kind of accepted them as norm. They didn't know any different. Everything was closed off. There wasn't really much communication to the outside world. And some information came through from the Eastern sort of European countries that life was a little bit better across the Iron Curtain. But growing up, we didn't really know that much more.
What was your education like there?
Again, growing up in Rustavi, my grandma was an English teacher. So, and also she seemed to have had either some sort of an administrative position within that school. So I felt that it was great. I went to a Georgian kindergarten. Mum tells me that apparently they were all meant to be talking Georgian, but because I'd grown up talking Russian, I refused to talk Georgian, and so they all talked Russian to me.
So what led to the move?
Sure. Yeah. Look, as I was sort of saying, by late 80s, things were getting a little bit tough. I still remember in the mid 80s when there were communist demonstrations, red flags everywhere, all that kind of stuff. I remember that. And then there was a sudden shift, because by that time, the government realized that the system was broken.
And what year is this? What year were we talking?
Late 80s, maybe 86, 87, thereabouts. 1985 was officially when what's called perestroika was announced, which means reform. At the time, Mikhail Gorbachev was the president. And so he kind of said, all right, we now need to shift to a different way of doing things, because what we've been doing so far has led to a country that is, the system is broken. It just isn't going to let us go and compete at the level of because our cars were rubbish. People didn't have microwaves. We got a color television, I think, in the late 80s or mid 80s or thereabouts. So in terms of its rate of livability compared to Europe, let alone US, was so far behind. People didn't really know any better, most of them, but information was starting to seep through. And as it was seeping through, cracks were starting to appear. There was a very strong push against private enterprise. So typically, you couldn't really say, all right, I'm now going to go and start a business. There was no such thing. Everything was state-owned.
Wow.
And because of that, anybody that was a little bit more entrepreneurial were either typically suppressed. They either were sent to Siberia if they did something that was untoward the party and the organization. And at some point of time, I think they realized that, hey, we can't keep this going for that much longer, because we're going to have a proper revolution on our hands within a very short period of time. Also, by the time they announced this reform, Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, which are on the outskirts of Soviet Union, on the other side, the Baltic states, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, they'd all wanted to separate off, because by that time it was like, well, we don't really want to be part of this big group. We have our own identity. We don't really want that. We're quite happy talking our own language. We have our own culture. No thanks. So unfortunately, that placed us in a bit of a tough spot, because my family had come from Ukraine. We had different heritage to what people in Georgia were growing up with. And so that really made it quite challenging for my family. Both my parents had PhDs. They worked at university, but they couldn't hold a position of chief of laboratory for my father specifically because he wasn't Georgian. He had a different surname.
Right.
He straight away was disqualified.
Mm-hmm.
And so to someone like that, you tell them, hey, no, you can't have that. Why not?
So they would educate them to the level of a doctorate within country. But
of course.
Right. That doesn't, of course, kind of doesn't make sense.
But there'd
to
be
me.
a ceiling.
If they're going to limit them anyway.
And it's not a glass ceiling, it's a concrete
Correct.
ceiling.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Almost
Correct.
counterintuitive.
Correct. So, and that was just the way that it seemed to be. And the suppression happened and was happening for a long, long time before that. It wasn't like it started back then. It was more that by the time 1980s came around, it was the end of the line for that kind of attitude. And so that had to change. So 1989 was when Georgia declared independence. They said, right, we've had enough. We want to be separate. A nationalist party came to power.
Mm-hmm.
That nationalist party made it very clear that people that had come from other parts of Soviet Union were not welcome anymore. It was a very sort of a softly defined story. They sort of said, guests are welcome in the morning for breakfast. You can hang around for lunch, but by dinner time, you need to go.
Yeah.
And it's just how it was.
So what was the process to come to Australia then? From there, obviously, it got to a point where there was very little prospects.
That's right.
It
was looking quite dicey.
Yeah, and your parents are looking at it, going, "I want to raise a family."
That's right.
Surely there's something better.
That's right. And so around that kind of time, there were different opportunities to leave. We could have left through, there was a program, I think, set up in that late 80s to immigrate to Israel.
Yeah.
My parents said no, they don't want to go through that way. They want to go through a skilled migration program. And so opportunities were there to apply to the US, Canada, or Australia. They thought, okay, well, let's just go all three. And it was happening in a really tough time. So 1989, when I mentioned that Georgia declared independence, Russia wasn't really keen on that happening. So to quell that kind of resistance, at the time the Afghanistan war was going on, they thought, well, it's not too far away. We're going to send up some troops from Afghanistan and we're going to suppress those kind of feelings of nationalism. There was a Sunday when tanks rolled into the capital city. There was a very bloody resistance. The army used whatever tools they had, and it was a very, very tough time for Georgia. So,
did you witness that first?
I remember it. Yeah, I remember it. We went there. My parents were working in the capital city, but we stayed home because we were living in the Tbilisi at the time. So, when it becomes a battlefield, we're civilians. We're not going to go and try to be partisans as they used to have. So I think there were some moments that were like real touch and go from memory because the paperwork took about 3 years to finally get approved. There was a moment when my father was supposed to fly out. The papers were being sent to Georgia. On the morning that he was going, the papers arrived. So if he had left, the papers had gone the next day, then whatever sync wouldn't have happened.
Sliding door.
Kind of stuff like that. Also, there was a couple of friends of theirs that had left to Australia about 10 years before. And it just so happened that in Moscow, when my father was going to the Australian embassy, those people were there in Moscow for whatever reason at that embassy. And what was necessary was a letter of support. So because of that coincidental chance meeting, it was like, wow.
Amazing.
So Australia was it.
Yeah.
And here we are. Look, I saw what was happening there. I was also starting to get a little bit of exposure to the rest of the world. In 1990, I was very fortunate to be selected to fly to France. There was a competition in a particular style of teaching where I needed to remember things. And so there was a group of us on a bit of a exchange program of sorts that we got to fly to Paris. And I was staying with a family in Paris. They took me to Roland Garros, and I saw suddenly a completely different experience of life outside of Soviet Union where we grew up. It's just different.
That sounds like a 1 in a million opportunity for someone where you came from. Is that right? Like, not too many people have had that.
It was quite unique.
Yeah,
it was quite unique. I'm sure there was like you had to pay to be there, and my parents paid to do that, to go on that program. The year before, I'd gone to Switzerland, and that time was also for about a week or so that we were there. I didn't have any money except for Russian rubles. And there's my 12-year-old or 11, it was 1990, about 12 or so. I wanted to bring back presents because typically when my dad went over to somewhere, he came back, he brought presents. So I thought, okay, well, here we go. There's my opportunity. I had some Russian rubles with me. So I thought maybe somebody wants these rubles, they'll give me francs. So I went up, found the kid, said, I've got some rubles, whichever way I communicated, and ended up exchanging, I think, a couple of rubles for, 4 or 5 francs. I'm sure it was just here is something, here you go. But I brought back an avocado, which we've never had. I brought back a Barbie doll for my sister. And so I remember doing that activity, and it's like, oh, okay, this is something that's forbidden in Soviet Union. Yes. You're not allowed to trade. You're not allowed to do any of that kind of stuff. But you can.
Do you still look at avocados? Like, does it still refreshing?
30 years later, it's not quite as probably memorable, and lots of time has gone off.
Just to still have the Barbie doll.
She probably doesn't, but she remembers about the avocado and the Barbie doll, and she wrote about them in her book. So it's quite interesting because then the next year I came prepared for the Paris trip. I brought back more rubles.
Right. Actually, this leads on nicely to the next thing. What was it like, that cultural shock of coming to Australia? Did you come by plane or did you come?
Yeah, I still remember it 30 years later. That's the amazing bit. We flew in so let me just rewind back to 1990. So when we had left, family friends of ours said, we're going to Sydney from Moscow. They left in August, we left in October, 91. For whatever reason, my parents decided to go to Moscow a bit earlier rather than like very late in the piece. By 1991, civil war had started. So if we we flew out around about June, July. If we had waited for a month, we wouldn't have been able to fly out because the airport got bombed. It wasn't safe. Everything was coming to a real sort of pro-Russian troops, nationalist troops. It was all on. And escaping that moment also seemed like fortune. It was just sliding doors. We're meant to go. We're meant to be there. We'd arrived in Australia on the 10th of October, 91. We flew from Sydney to, I think it was Dubai, then Bangkok, then down to Sydney. I remember we were met by these family friends of ours. It was middle of the day. I lay down because flights, jet lag. I woke up and there's all these people around me, and our family friend, the wife, she's like, oh, let me take you to the supermarket. Okay, cool. And middle of Bondi, we drive down and I see this just abundance of food. There's meats, there's cheeses, there's fruit, there's vegetables. There's just, because we've come from a place which was quite restricted in a lot of ways. My grandpa had what's called a dacha. So it's a little plot of land outside of the city where he had a little house and he grew stuff. That was the way that they supported and basically added on to whatever they could get out of shops. And so we basically relied on ourselves in a big way most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
Here, all of a sudden, as long as you have money, you can buy whatever you want.
That resilience, though, that's helped you throughout your whole life, hasn't it? Really, that grounding.
It certainly gave me perspective. It certainly gave me an appreciation for what there is outside and what is possible. And at the same time, perhaps the humility of knowing, hey, we've come from not a lot. We can
and what
push
was
through.
the contrast to when you saw the attitudes of kids that you're at school with and their abundance, the plenty that they had, and obviously it's we shouldn't necessarily take advantage. We shouldn't necessarily take for granted the abundance, but we as humans have a right to be happy and
of course,
and
of course,
and have some
of
abundance.
course, of course.
So, what was your attitude when you saw these kids getting everything and probably not appreciating it as much as you? It must have been quite a cultural shock for you.
Yeah, it was an interesting experience. I can tell you as much. In year 8, so I started there at a school in Sydney. I was offered a scholarship. We had come from decent grades back in Georgia. And my mum had always cut my hair. So I was teased. I told them that I'm from Georgia. I barely had any language. And they said, oh, Georgia, US. No. Near Russia. Oh, so you're Russian? No, I'm not Russian. Georgian. Okay. It went along that way. But look, the main realization was at some point of time was that most people don't appreciate the level of opportunity they have.
Yep.
So the chip on the shoulder, how I like to sort of define it these days, is something that I'm quite aware of, and it's an amazing skill. It's an amazing strength. It's an amazing gift, because when somebody else is clocking off at 5 o'clock, 5 o'clock is just the time.
Yep.
It's just a number. We continue. So the other experience that was quite shocking to me was having to learn English, because I'd come from, obviously, I spoke probably 4 or 5 languages by the time I got here. I spoke Georgian, I spoke Russian, I was learning French, I was learning Italian, because we're told that to come across, you've got to have all these things. And so I had those elements of it. And all of a sudden I'm here and I've got skills I know that I did well at school. I got 32 in my year in, I think it was science in year 8. And 32 is like, wow, that's a big change to what I was used to.
32 out of 100, is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
I didn't study for maths. I got 97. That was fine, because we had learned the system was quite different in Russia or in Soviet Union. So we were progressively learning a lot further than what it was seemed to be like learning here. So that was like I'd been learning the stuff that was in year 8 2 years before. So I didn't really study. But English was probably in the 30s. Science was in the 30s. And it was all because I didn't know the language.
Yeah.
Grammar was off. Everything was off. So I probably didn't start that until we'd come to Melbourne. But every day after school, I went to the library and read for an hour or two. And within a year, my grades were back up. So it was just a matter of time to catch up to it. So, temporary setbacks, good resilience.
So we're from there. What did you study at university? I'm assuming you went to university.
Yeah, sure thing. Look, it was an interesting thing again. I'd finished school with a close to 97 in the ATAR or whatever the equivalent was back then in Melbourne. And I had choice of a lot of different courses. At one point of time, the course, like we had a study coordinator or careers counselor person who said, oh, well, because both of your parents are in IT, you've got to go into IT. That to me seemed like it wasn't a very straightforward decision. Hey, just because of that.
It's a bit arbitrary.
It is completely
Yeah.
arbitrary. It makes no sense whatsoever to me. And so I thought about where would I like to actually head towards. And back when I was a kid, I enjoyed drawing cars. I thought, okay, maybe that's something that I could explore as an idea. I did specialist math methods, physics, chem, English, IT, and Russian as a language other than English. And so there was no drawing, no portfolio. But industrial design seemed like a cool option. So at the time, Monash University was the first year when they offered this course as a double degree of mechanical engineering and industrial design that could have led to car design, which I thought was a really cool thing to pursue. Little did I know about the actual car design, but it sounded like a good idea at the time. So I applied, got in, and at the same time, I'm sort of forming my understanding of the world and opportunities versus what is possible. I'd been exposed to a couple of business people, but mainly it was my father was working at Monash University. My mum was working at Monash University. They both had secured their academic positions. They were traveling, they were writing papers, they were presenting lectures and doing all that kind of stuff. And they said, look, you basically got to get a job. Once you get a job, you get promoted, you get onto the next job, and off you go up the corporate ladder. That's the way to get happiness.
Okay.
I thought, okay, that's an interesting idea.
That's one take.
It's one take, exactly. It's a safe take, perhaps. And so I started with that degree thinking that car design is it. I love it. I'm going to learn to draw. I have no idea how to draw, kind of, but I'll do my best. So the first year's intake was 16 kids into that double degree stream. Within a year, it was down to 8 because all of a sudden we're having to use left, right brain at the same time. Not everybody can obviously collate them all. And once you fail a subject, well, at school, I was very lucky to have gone to a school that had forced us to get good grades. At university, you could do whatever you want.
Yes, that safety net disappears, doesn't it?
Yeah, if you want to play basketball, you don't have to study.
Did you actually study car design? Because I know you've dabbled a bit.
Oh, no, I love designing cars. I mean, I've been into cars my whole life, and I had dreams of designing, building my own car, and it didn't take me long to realise from talking to some automotive design engineers that their whole careers and their excitement was based around the very, very few jobs in Australia there are. And primarily they spend all of their time getting excited about designing. They've been in charge for 6 months of designing petrol cabs.
Right.
Wow. And they graduated up to wing mirrors. Yes. And I thought, long gone are the 1920s and 30s where a man has a vision or a woman has a vision and they of an engineering project, and then they go out and they design it and they make it, they race it. If you look at probably the most famous, in my mind anyway, Sir Jack Brabham. He's the only person in history to have won Drivers' Champion and Constructors' Championship for designing his own race car, building his own race car, and then winning the series in Grand Prix. So that era's gone.
Their own engineers too, aren't they? It's like pit stop, get out the car, change a tire.
To some extent.
Yeah.
To some extent. At that level, I mean, he was winning. He had a great team. He had some great people with him. So long gone are those days where a person can have that vision and then run that vision through to completion, especially in automotive, because everything is so highly technologically advanced now. You can't possibly all of that be cracked out of the brain of one person. Your head would blow up. Unless, of course, you're Elon Musk.
Well, keep in mind, put into context the time. So the time when that was all sort of happening for me was around the mid-90s. And by mid-90s, we had sort of come through a little bit of that recession we had to have.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't such a great old time to be expanding. It may have been a start of something, but it certainly wasn't opportunities left, right, and center to go into car design. And from reading books and talking to a few people, I kind of realized that Australia's a bit of a dead end. aside from the fact that they may have been lucky to design the latest cup holder in the Holden, they were not anywhere near being able to design and draw the entire car. And those people were graduating out of places like Art Center College of Design in Pasadena.
Yes. Yeah.
To which, as part of my trip to the US in 2000, I went and visited them. And they said, no problem, you can come in. You've got a bit of a portfolio by that time happening. I started in 96, so by then I developed something. The only challenge was $30,000 per semester, US.
Wow.
3 semesters per year, 3 years.
No such thing as HECS either, I'm guessing. And think that
correct. You're a foreign student, no problem. If you're capable of doing that, $270,000
and you're not
in debt
working,
at the end of it.
You're not working in a coffee shop or behind a bar earning enough money to pay for that.
All that.
Yeah.
So to me, that was like, all right, fine. That's one avenue that's not going to work out. Yeah. I'd spoken to a few automotive engineers in Australia that basically said the culture was such that if you had left work before 7 o'clock, even if you had nothing else to do, you were seen as a slacker.
Yeah.
So you had to get in, you had to leave, and you couldn't leave until 7 o'clock at night. To me, that, again, did not make any sense whatsoever. When I first got into uni, I applied for and was successful in securing a scholarship from BHP in mechanical engineering. So every summertime...
You might have to pause for a minute.
What is that? Vacuuming?
That's the blower.
Oh, yeah.
For the business next door. They're just blowing the leaves off of the...
Nice. We'll continue on.
Can you make a note of the time on the recording?
Just clap.
One on that.
Here we go. Great.
That'll only be a minute or two. They generally are.
Yeah.
I can do some coughing.
Yeah. So the scholarship at BHP, again, gave me a bit of an insight into corporate culture and what was going on at the time in that. We, as graduate engineers, were in the first year expected to do whatever. We were in a steel plant at BHP down at Hastings in Victoria. And for the first year, we were in the maintenance shed, it was called back then. The typical day started at 7 o'clock. 9 o'clock was smoko. So as soon as people got in, they kind of hung around, they grabbed a coffee, did a little bit of something. 9 o'clock, they had a break for half an hour. Then lunchtime was about 11:30, 12. We, again, did whatever we could. We weren't expected to do very much. We were offered to paint some equipment. We were offered to wash floors. There's the graduate engineers that are expected to be moved through ranks, right? Yeah. And in general, we just did something. We were paid quite well for doing nothing. And the day finished at 3 o'clock. So there were about 3 or 4 breaks. In between those breaks, you just did whatever you could to make it to the end of the day.
But what a great opportunity. And I think that's if you've got a lot of people coming through. And in the 80s and 90s, that was toward the end of the apprenticeship era in Australia, which was, many would argue that was a catastrophic time in Australian history. You've got all these people coming through into that position and they're all qualified, so they've all motivated up to the point. Then they're put into this position where if they want to excel and pick something up, here's an opportunity. But if you're lazy, here's an opportunity to also prove that you're not the person we want.
And you're not going to do very much at all. Yeah. There were certain moments where culturally there were clashes at that point of time. Some graduates were Aussie, some graduates were Asian background kids. And we all had this thing, basically, here you are, you're thrown into a big melting pot. By second year, we were at a place called the cold steel mill plant. That's where steel was rolled and reduced down to a certain thickness. By then, we were already in the position of learning more about proper engineering. Yeah. We were part of an engineering crew. again, we weren't expected to do very much. And so I went up to the chief engineer and said, hey, listen, you got to give me some sort of a project. I want to learn something beyond, what we did last year, painting and cleaning. That's not what I signed up for, kind of thing. And challenging that status quo was becoming more and more a lesson for me that, hey, doing that separates me from anybody else that is just prepared to do whatever.
Think outside the box.
And you really had to. So he said, oh, you just wait. Eventually, I pestered him enough that he gave me a project. I remember that project. I completely over-engineered it, but I basically had to build a little inspection platform over a part of a production process that I doubt anybody ever used. But they built it. And they built it, and the next year when I was at another part of the plant, I came down and actually had a look at it, and sure enough, it was there, and it was built. So that was really, really cool to see that. But unless I pushed for it, I doubt anything would have changed. I don't know whether any of the others took those kind of steps, but everybody kind of settled in based on their expectations. But to me, very soon, I realized that being in that kind of corporate environment was not it. There were too many people up ahead in the stream towards those managerial positions. I couldn't see how they were able to jump until the other person retired. And so this idea of, get a good job, get promoted, get another good job, and so forth, did not seem like the way forward for someone that had ambition. So to me, it was quite clear that I had to find a different way out. And so after I finished with that scholarship, after I got out of the uni degree, I got myself into a small industrial design company. They were designing blinds, so I had enough experience to land that job and to be the chief designer there. There were only 7 people there, so not much to talk about. But the founder had failed about 4 times prior. He used to be a motorbike mechanic on the Yamaha racing team. Right. So he'd come from a self-taught designer, super clever engineer that had failed many times and was on this 4th iteration of this shading motorized blinds idea business. And here is a complete opposite to a regimented thousands and thousands of people organization to a tiny little team, and seeing how he was a leader in that team, how he was maintaining the team.
Was this the Vogola? Is that what you were working on?
No, the company was called Reflex Shading Systems. So motorized shading systems for quite high-end homes and commercial places. I learned a lot from being in that space. It was a completely different environment, obviously, and just seeing those 2 polar opposites, again, right, maybe building a business is a good idea, but perhaps failing 4 times is not the best idea on the planet. How do we build something that actually will continue? And by that time, I'd kind of given up the idea on doing car design. I thought I'll settle with driving nice cars. I'll just have to work out a way to earn enough to have that. So that was kind of the decision that I came to at the end of the degree.
This entrepreneurial thing, though, has just been bubbling along the whole time, hasn't it, through your entire uni degree?
I think so. I think it was always there. There was definitely that attitude, and especially coming from the country that I did. In Georgia, I saw lots and lots of people doing stuff. Whilst it wasn't permitted or allowed, people were still trading. It was just in the nature of the place. So either it was bartering or it was properly creating something and then selling that on. But it was inevitable that it was going to pop out and come through. So I'd also, at the time, started on my self-development journey. I was given a book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, which I was like, right, that's actually my life. This whole get a good job, process.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. Yes, I've been told
Who's that
that's a
book
good
by
thing.
again?
Robert Kiyosaki. Yes, it was one of the first ones that was given to me by this family that had 3 hairdressing salons.
Mhm.
So they were in small business, and they basically said to me, "You don't need to do very much. Just buy a corner shop, operate that. You'll get 100 grand a year or thereabouts. What else do you need?" Another idea. And
Yep.
to me, somebody had said, "Work smarter, not harder."
Yep.
That made sense, provided that it actually worked.
Mhm.
Because the people that had the hairdressing salons, they worked very hard.
Mm-hmm.
They had succeeded. They had come from Moscow, so migrants, and I have a lot of respect for them. The challenge was that the father, who had worked just insane amount of hours, unfortunately passed at the age of 42.
Goodness.
So the working harder part,
Yeah.
maybe there's a different way. And at the same time, I'd gone along to a property development seminar. This is early 2000s. At the seminar, all of a sudden, what the person was speaking from stage made sense.
Mm-hmm.
You're bringing together somebody else's knowledge. You're bringing together somebody else's assets. As long as you can work out financing, as long as you can manage the entire process, the completion of it creates a profit. If theoretically everything is done right, that profit gets shared, and all of a sudden, here is a way forward.
Mm-hmm.
So, at the same time, I think Australia had started its property boom cycle, having gone through all the challenges of the early 1990s. So timing was good.
Early 2000s.
Yeah, this is early 2000s. So by early 2000s, I'd experienced big corporate, experienced small business, and recognized that neither of them really had the answer for me back then. A couple of friends were saying, well, why don't we start doing this property development thing by ourselves? Okay, no money, but lots of energy, lots of enthusiasm. Great. How do we start? I was still living at home at the time, so the risk was very low.
Yeah.
I figure, there's enough time for me to make a few mistakes. Those friends found a guy who was a property development side broker. He offered to teach us how to do this thing.
Fantastic.
Right?
Is this the foray into your mentorships, I guess?
A little bit of it.
Yeah.
A little bit of it. At the time, living in Melbourne, for those that know Melbourne, I was in an area called Ormond, which is not far from Bentley. The development side broker was in Doncaster. So Bentley or Ormond to Doncaster is about an hour or so, hour and a half.
Northwest.
Yeah, northwest. South north.
Yep.
Yeah. So Doncaster is, north towards the outskirts.
Yeah.
And he said, all right, well, come on Tuesday for 8 hours or whatever time you're going to be here. And I said, all right, what am I going to do? You'll call. Who am I going to call? Here's a list. You'll call these people. What am I going to say? I don't know. You'll work it out.
Why is it such a scary prospect, that cold calling? I don't know. It's just a phone call, right? It's just picking up a phone. It's another person on the other end. I mean, but
that you've never met.
Yeah.
That you're trying to immediately build rapport within the first few seconds that they don't. As soon as they realize that it's a cold call, they're either going to hang up. You've got that little moment to prove yourself, or fail. And so every time you make that moment, I did a similar role to this in the 90s. I did helped a marketing campaign for a famous champagne brand in a famous hotel in the city. And my job was to cold call hundreds and hundreds of guests from the hotel and tell them that congratulations, you've won an opportunity to win a bottle of champagne.
Yeah.
And this process just went on. So for the first hour, I think I was sweating. I was nervous. this is terrible. What if they say no? What if they're rude? What if they don't want to do it? And I just ended up after an hour numb to it and just did it. And I just did it for about 2 weeks. And then I thought, it's exactly why I'm trying to progress out of this environment. And so it was great. It was good training.
Did you get better at it though? I mean,
no. I got better at ignoring the emotion, the thing in my brain that was saying, run away. So I could switch that off. But no, I think so now I've taken over the story. Go on, please.
No, look, I can definitely relate. There's so much to it. At the same time, I'm just trying to work whatever out, just hustling.
Yeah.
Because I realized that the job that I was in wasn't going to get me anywhere. And this would have been sort of late 2000.
Mm-hmm.
Late 2000, early 2001. By early 2001, I've realized that I've got to get out. I quit officially in April 2001 from that job. And then all of a sudden I had all this time. On Tuesday, I was going to Doncaster, making phone calls. I've got this hairdressing family that's saying to me, go and buy a tuck shop or go do this, go do that. I'm introduced to a whole bunch of other people. I remember that I was introduced to a gentleman who was selling artwork. And he said, go and sell artwork. I'll give you some money. Door to door.
God, I remember those
really?
when I was in Sydney. Was that? No, this is Melbourne.
This is Melbourne.
Yeah.
So he's like, all right, what am I going to say? What am I going to sell? He said, here is a pack of art prints. Go to a shopping center and sell. Right. Okay. That's an interesting idea. I think I lasted about a week.
Yeah. That's a tough call.
Have you done anything like that?
No, I never did.
Any sales ones?
Yeah, I guess through my own businesses, I've had to.
Yeah, but I mean, in those early formative years,
I started at footwear and Kmart.
Right. Footwear. Yeah, I started.
At least you had training.
Oh no, I didn't. I
just go here and see. These are shoes,
exactly,
and here's the price.
Yeah.
If someone wants something, if they ask a question, just tell them go and try it on over there.
The worst was the phones, because the phone would ring and they didn't teach me the phone system in Kmart, and like those old school phones. There's like 50 buttons on there.
Oh yes,
channels. And I just looked at it. Footwear, Kmart, and then I remember that about 2 weeks into the manager comes over with her, lady in tow. Who here has been hanging up on all the people? It's like, I don't know. No idea.
How long did you last at that for?
I reckon I was there about, a year and a half. I was like 14, 15, getting high on opening, 300 pairs of thongs out of plastic bag. I remember that one. That was
right. Oh, what a day.
Yeah, and the whole time just looking over at automotive, because I just wanted to work at the the auto shop. It's like I can help people there. I was 14 and had my own car. I was building a car at that stage. But it was like shoes and thongs and Ugg boots was just not my jam.
Right. Yeah,
I tried selling a famous high quality vacuum cleaner that's been around for 50 years, and it converts into a spray paint. It converts into all sorts of different things. I won't say the brand name because that'd be it may just summon up those demons of my past. I got the training. There was this training morning, and everyone was so enthusiastic to this big thing. Now, you've got to go in there. You've got to just knock on the door. You've got to in the morning, you ring 20 people and you set yourself up for meetings through the week. Hello, you've won a free vacuuming and of your sofa with our high intensity machine, and it'll clean it perfectly. And when you get there, it's a demonstration. You sprinkle a bit of stuff on the floor and then you vacuum up.
Oh, the white powder, yeah.
And then you have to try and sell. And then even if they're yelling and screaming, you cannot leave. If you want to leave, you had to call the manager, say they're yelling now and they're hitting me. And I have to leave. Can I leave, please? I made about 4 phone calls, got nowhere, and I lasted about 11 minutes. I'm at sales. I'm really good at drawing pictures.
Yeah.
So this is interesting because back in the early 90s or thereabouts, we had a door-to-door salesman come to us selling Encyclopedia Britannica.
That would be tough.
Yeah. My parents bought that.
Wow.
After whatever period of time, we also had a salesman.
Original subscription model, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So
What's going
we
on?
also had a door-to-door salesman from Kirby vacuum cleaners come to us.
Yes.
And my parents bought a vacuum cleaner from them. So I'd been exposed to there's all these different things that we'd never seen before.
Mhm.
And people are making money out of doing that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
So here is me. I've got these experiences. I've studied the degrees that I have.
Yeah.
I've completed them. I got out first out of those 2 degrees, out of our whole intake. But that was almost a dead end because all of a sudden I got to a place where from there, I've got to jump somewhere
Mhm.
and there's no immediate continuation. These same families said, hey, why don't you buy a restaurant or a cafe? Because property developers, it's a very tough gig.
Mhm.
Sometimes there's business and sometimes there isn't, but you need cash flow. You need to feed the family.
Mhm.
I thought, okay, that sounds like an idea. Why don't I go and learn actually what is involved in being in a cafe? I went and pestered somebody to give me a job as a kitchen hand. He taught me how to make pizzas. It was great. I've also realized after about 6 months that I had wanted nothing to do with that business.
Yeah.
So you've got a double degree in engineering, industrial design. You're
Oh,
making
yes.
pizzas,
Absolutely.
and you're still trying to work out what to do with your life.
And I'm going to learn about this property development thing.
And you're learning, and you're speaking multiple languages.
Oh, yes.
You're not very qualified. I can understand why you end up making pizzas.
There was a lot of frustration there. There's a lot of pent up frustration. Yeah. And eventually it led to me working this property development thing out. Because after we'd realized that, hey, cold calling builders, cold calling developers, trying to marry them up, there's far too much uncertainty. There's far too much risk. If we're trying to be a project manager, it's too easy to get rid of us. So I proceeded to get another piece of paper, a license of a real estate agent.
Right.
To add to my various academic accomplishments. Because by then, to get a license, it was just like, whatever, just study and get it.
I think this sums you up there. I mean, you are a lifelong learner.
I figure I have to be.
Yeah.
That's kind of the mentality that I developed.
Yeah.
Because all the information, there's so much learning out there. There's so much knowledge out there. What is it that separates people that are actually achieving results versus the ones that are continually learning? And at that same formative time, I was introduced to the work of Tony Robbins. I was invited to a 7-day seminar where there were a few things that to me seemed quite different. I thought that I was able to go and walk on coals. There was a whole big thing about being able to do this fire walk thing.
Yeah.
Right. In some of the other seminars, I'd learned how to break an arrow with my neck, stepping onto that.
As you do.
As you do, right?
It's pretty handy.
Yeah, it's a quite useful skill, right?
Whilst you're making pizzas.
Yes.
And selling a house.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And building steps over industrial equipment.
Yeah.
Had Harold known that at Hastings, he may still be here with us now, and England may have been a slightly different place.
Well,
what was the Tony Robbins experience like? I mean, you see, I've only seen videos of it, and it seems massively hyped and things like that. But is it useful? I mean, if you're slightly cynical, do you sit back and go, "Oh man, what are these people on?" Or do you just get caught up in the hype yourself?
Right. So it was quite interesting because it's a 7-day event, that particular one, on the Gold Coast, Royal Pines Resort. The cost of it for an attendance is about $7,000. And early 2000s, it's a lot of money.
Yeah.
Right. And also, as part of that whole thing, it was the food package was with it, all vegetarian.
Oh,
right. I'd come from a place where we ate meat 3 times a day.
Challengement.
So there's a lot of things that are like, okay, look, I'm a positive guy. Try this on 7 days. How bad can it be? I get in there, and the course, there were about 1,200 people from all around the world. And one of the most unique experiences was when he asked openly in the room, who here is suicidal? Right.
Wow.
Yeah.
Big question.
Big question. Big question. And out there like that, well, a few days into the course, not immediately.
Well,
but
5
still.
days of being on a vegetarian diet where you're carnivore, I think it would have doubled the numbers.
It didn't wait that long. I think it was about 2 days into it, or 3 days. But I've come from very traditional upbringing, from a place where in the Soviet Union, people didn't really talk about mental health. There was no such thing.
Yeah.
People drank and the problems went away.
Suppression.
That was
Speaking of which, is it too early?
Yes.
And whether they went away or not, but here is a guy who's openly challenging people around their deepest held secrets.
Yeah.
And when he worked through some of these experiences with the people that were there that seemingly had been able to achieve an outcome where they looked positively on life forward, to me seemed like, wow, there's a lot more in that brain of ours that we had learned that we hadn't realized that's there. So out of that experience was probably when my real mentorship kind of pathway started. I met a few people there that had, for starters, paid that kind of money to be there, and had come from all kinds of walks of life. One was a very high-level architect that had been doing projects worldwide and had developed things that were incredible, yet was here together with everybody else learning about how to be better. There was another gentleman there that became my mentor who'd at the time had businesses globally, and he gave me this one tip, which was this program called Time of Your Life. And to me, it was like, wow, somebody's handing me gold. How do I now really take advantage of that? I went through that program. It was quite intense. There were a few things in that program that then required me to write things out. And since then, I'd been working using that program from there on. So the last 20 odd years, that's become my operating system of sorts.
Wow.
And it was just due to that coincidental meeting, me following up on that meeting, catching up with that gentleman back in Melbourne. And yeah, just regularly keeping tabs and asking him, what's his secret? How did he get to where he got to? Because although he was born into the family that had that business, they weren't really doing very much with it until he came on board. He expanded it. He went globally, bought other businesses, tacked things in, did separate things. A real entrepreneur. And I think it's about 4 or 5 years ago when I caught up with him, he's like, yeah, I've just bought the most expensive house in Portsea. And so he's done well.
Sounds like it.
Right. That was a really successful part of his life. There were other parts of his life that weren't all that well worked out, so to say. So to me, I kind of defined that maybe I can't just follow anybody, and it's not a matter of putting anybody on a pedestal. You know, a person walks, talks, and does everything else. And so whatever they've been able to achieve, if I really want that level of success, then that's the pathway that I need to go by. Or if I don't want what they're having, well, one part of their life comes along with all of their other parts of their life. So I actually need to find maybe a different alternative or craft my own.
Actually, we normally ask this question at the end is, how do you define success? But I think right now seems like a perfect time to discuss that.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. It's something that I've been thinking about for a very long time. And success to me is unique to me. I have a very keen awareness of my values and priorities in life. And so money is really just a vehicle for certain things that I want to have in my life. I want to be able to complete an Ironman. I want to be able to travel with my family. I want to be able to provide different things. I want to be able to create an opportunity to employ a refugee from another country. So those kind of things satisfy me far beyond than perhaps the number in the bank account. The numbers are great. Don't get me wrong. I pushed for them.
It facilitates, and to a large extent, for most people, it's the barometer of their success.
Sure.
Whether that and as you say, that the amount that you've got there just facilitates those other things like competing and being able to do those things.
Correct. To me, freedom is the most important element.
Yep.
The definition of success is me being able to do whatever I want to do at whatever time I want to do it. If I'm capable of doing that, then I'm successful. And to achieve that is actually not that complicated. It's not that hard. I've taken on big risks earlier on. I bought property earlier on, went out on limbs when I couldn't achieve it. It was an interesting experience where when I signed the contract, had no idea how I was actually going to complete that contract. And then they said, oh, we're going to require you to settle in 12 months' time or 15 months' time, thereabouts. And then they called up in about 9 months' time saying, oh, we're ahead of schedule. I hope you're ready to settle. And at the time, I was still working at shading systems, and I was quite shocked that that came across that quickly, and I had no experience before back then. And so I asked permission to leave. I went home and I threw up because it was like, wow, I have no idea how this is actually going to be completed. Within a week, I sold that contract by myself, made $12,000 on it. So
bite off more than you can chew and chew like hell.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Something like that, because it was, and again, coming out of that Anthony Robbins seminar where they define massive action is you take whatever action you have to do, whatever it takes.
Yep.
And some things are a must, some things are shoulds. This was a must. I went to a finance broker. He said, you can't settle. Right. Shit.
What am I going to do?
I better get moving.
Yeah.
That's incredible. I don't think we've kind of answered the question about Tony Robbins though, like those seminars.
Yeah.
Did you find yourself getting wrapped up in that kind of energy, or because you come across as incredibly analytical? Did you sit back and observe more the actions of others and go, some of this seems a bit irrational, or did you get wrapped up in it yourself?
Yeah, interesting question. I started with that organization around 2002. I didn't get a chance to walk on coals in that particular seminar, which was a bit of a bummer. But I did kind of get an insight into another side of the world that I'd never been exposed to. At the same time, I'd met some incredible people, and it's like, wow, I can learn so much. I'm a lifelong learner. Wow, how do I get more of this? But at the same time, hey, maybe there's more to it than just what appears, I guess, on the surface. So I'd gone along to probably about another 3 or 4 different seminars of that nature. I was also exposed to another side of learning called landmark education, which is a completely different way of dealing with self-development. And the whole process of evolution or learning or that self-development thing may have gotten a bad rap purely because people like Tony Robbins create an incredible atmosphere.
Yeah.
It's a rock concert and it's scripted by minute. I got a chance to work on behind the scenes as a crew volunteer member, and I saw how it was being run and how an effective business like that, within 4 days, he was taking home over $1 million. The organizers were taking around the same amount. So it was a very, very profitable venture. And that was being run on a yearly basis in many countries around the world. So you can understand the scale of that. Yeah. So being analytical, as you say, wanting to understand how stuff works, I could also see that there were people that were going to those courses and not really doing very much with that information after that finished and came out of it.
Yeah.
And look, not to judge, somebody might have a great time 4 days of the year, and maybe the rest of the year is miserable, so they deserve all they deserve. They want to have that. Good luck to them. It certainly wasn't the experience that I wanted to create. So I did finish up with that group of learning around 2006, but certainly took lots out of it. There's lots that I then implemented or tried to implement in my own capacity. And the main thing that I implemented was what I attribute to is the priority of values. Very few people actually sit down and look at what their values are. Or if they do, they don't really look at the order of those values. And to me, that seems to be the secret of success or failure in my own definition. Because a lot of people may say, right, they value financial success highly, yet they value their well-being not so much. So then they compromise their well-being by working 20 hours a day or whatever it takes, and neglecting their health to the degree that there's a joke that sort of says, oh, you spend all this time trading your health for your wealth so that later you have time to give away your wealth to get back your health. To me, that kind of didn't make any sense whatsoever again. So that's why every person's definition of success is unique to them. And there was a concept back then called wheel of balance or wheel of life. And it's a very simple diagram. You basically look at your different interests and values, and you put a point out of 10 on those values, and you draw a sort of a line around those points. And some people end up with a pretty jagged kind of a radial diagram that, imagine if they poured a little bit of fuel onto it and tried to go faster, and the car crash that some of those individuals end up having. So I wanted to avoid that. I didn't want to have the experience of the guy that went broke 4 times. That was, to me, again, another little thing that, yes, I have heard that some business people have gone bankrupt and then they come back 10 times more and better than they did. But in the meantime, they created a pretty serious car crash in the first place. It may have cost them family. It may have cost them all kinds of things. So how do I navigate my own pathway through that? Tony Robbins, lots of other books were instrumental in me trying to understand, how do I apply myself? Where do I need to get better to then be better going forward?
There can be a bit of a risk there, like reading that amount of books as well, right? Because it's, I think a lot of people read these self-help books to feel better about themselves, about having a shelf full of self-help books.
That's right. Sure.
And it's just glossed over.
Correct.
I've definitely been guilty of that.
Yeah.
And it's, how do you take it to that next level? How do you choose which ones to, take massive action on and implement in your life?
Yeah, great question. I try to go back to first principles in my own definition. What to me that means is the person that had written a book had gotten then learning and knowledge from somewhere else. So where did Tony Robbins get his learning? Where did the person before that get their learning? Books like Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, those kinds of books. I go back to those kind of classics because whilst they may not have had really polished lessons in those books, that was the raw information that allows me to digest it in my own way.
The first principle.
Yeah, rather than letting somebody else process it, and then here it is on the plate, which is another reason why whenever I see self-development speakers, if they're early in their journey, I'm much more likely to go along and listen to them rather than if they're later on. Because by the time they're later on, their product becomes so polished that it becomes incredibly difficult to break through that wall.
Yeah, the lesson becomes, the product they're selling becomes the product that they're selling. And it becomes...
Correct.
The next book in their journey is, how to make $1 million, and that is to write a book on how to make $1 million.
Absolutely.
So it'd be very easy to be very cynical about all of these. So you talk about going back to first principle. I would say that most, if not all, of these self-help books could probably all go back, find a root cause in How to Win Friends and Influence People, which is probably the top-selling self-help book in history.
Absolutely.
And that's still being evolved now. I believe. I think the Carnegie Mellon Institute is still evolving that book.
Yeah. Look, there's obviously lots of different areas of where we can get better, whether it's business life, personal life, etc.
Yeah.
If you apply that first principles thinking, you're much less likely to be caught up with a person who's going to sell you the fish rather than teaching you how to fish. Yeah. And to me, that's the key, because I'm not going to learn from a person that hadn't been to where I'd like to go to, for starters. They may have some theory, but ultimately, when they put that theory into practice, that's where real life feedback comes in. So
is their book, is their instruction just an interpretation of 3 other books, and they haven't actually done anything with it?
Correct. Yeah. And they're a great talker or a great seller. Yeah. And through my time in getting out there and learning how to be in business, I've met hundreds, if not more, people that were doing stuff. Property developers, builders, architects, all kinds of property-related people, as well as in the self-development space. Yeah. So most of them are on their own journey, whichever level they want to be at. And I'd also met some pretty serious car crashes where they'd gone out, they'd applied some theory, they'd gotten some early goals, and then had tried to accelerate those goals further and didn't have the substance underneath. That became my real sort of point. How do I build that substance without just trying to be, promoting an idea that I hadn't experimented on by myself? So leading back to how to choose a book, super important to choose a book from in an area that I'm actually working on, that is going to be immediately relevant, that I'm able to take at least one lesson out of and apply that lesson out of it. I met you through the Entrepreneurs Organization,
that's one of their methodologies,
which is a great place to meet amazing people. Again, the challenge becomes that how do you decide which thing to implement? There are so many ideas, so many strategies. They all sound so cool.
Yeah.
These people have done it and they're successful. Great. How do I do that?
But typically that's a product of their own effort, and it's 10% the book they chose. I presume that is the case. I mean, I haven't read many. Well, I have to be honest, I haven't read any self-help books.
Okay.
But I've tried to surround myself with people who then impart that knowledge by having conversations and learning from them. The arrogance of my youth, and most of us have, I thought, well, it's business. I either have a widget or I'm going to create a widget and I'm going to go and sell a widget. What's there to it? It's cool and everyone wants it. So, and years later, I'm still thinking, never sold many of those widgets. Maybe I should have read a book. So I want to ask, of all these books, so we're talking about this journey, your journey, and the books that you've picked up and you've read a lot, and you've been to these seminars. A young person today, couple of case points. So let's say we've got a young person who's starting a business. It doesn't really matter what it is, but they're going to provide a service. And it's a tough environment. There's either a lot of people doing it and there's not a lot of demand. Fresh out of university, starting that process, deciding to start a business because there's just not enough. All the jobs are taken. They could go the way I went, and that is, got a widget, trying to sell it, can't sell it. What do? I'll get a job, and I'll just won't stay in that industry because it's now dead to me, or I don't have any opportunities. Is there a course or a book? A book's going to be a lot cheaper than a course. Is there something, what process would you suggest to that young person to either read, attend, or participate in? It's very broad, but it's meant to be broad to give it
Sure.
general.
Let's step back a few steps. That person may have had a dream. They may have had a vision for what their life would look like. How clear are they on that dream? How clear are they in that vision? How much do they want it? Is the next question.
Mm-hmm.
Before they can choose a book or a course or anything like that, the difference is strategy and tactics.
Yep.
Strategy is where we're looking at helicopter level. We can see lots and lots of things up in advance, but that's the bit we want. Tactics are in between. Courses, books, all of those kinds of things to me are tactics.
Yeah.
Strategy, it's tactics for breakfast.
Yes. Yep. Well, let's assume that this person does have a vision. It is something that they must do because it's inherent in their nature, in their concept, and they've done all this stuff to get up to this point. So we're talking about this graduate or 1 or 2 years in. That I think that's the person that I'd like to use as a case point. So they're passionate, they're definite. This is definitely where I'm going. What do I do now?
How badly do they want it?
Well, let's say that more than mostly anyone else. And let's assume that this is definitely where they're going and they're going to put everything, absolutely everything into it. So this is the direction. Have
they thought about what it's going to look like at the end in terms of how they're going to impact? Is it going to be their immediate family? Are they going to have a family? Are they going to be just a single person? What is it that they are prepared to sacrifice? What is it they're prepared to commit to long term? And how badly do they want it? To me, it's quite simple as when the student is ready, the teacher appears. If we take that kind of universal attitude, then I feel that I'm quite intuitive in the way I go about doing things. It is almost like I can be in a space and look at books, and then that book will pop out as the next book.
I think a lot of my experience too, the younger people, they're scared to ask people, for advice.
Right.
They always think they need some kind of special invitation or something like that. I'm forever trying to convince people in my life. It's like, it's okay just to make a call, reach out. You'll be surprised the amount of people.
You've been very good at that.
Answer your call. I mean, I've done a lot of lessons through EO and through working with people like Stan, where it's like, it's just incredible that the return that you can get from being brave and making that
brave
cold
and reaching out,
or hopefully getting a warm intro. That's always a fantastic way of going.
That's why, to me, that goes back to their level of commitment. Because if their level of commitment is such that they're prepared to be rejected many times and keep coming back to that. I've been thrown out of offices. We had a particular script when we were calling up people, and then that particular gentleman saw through that script, and he's like, look, you're just doing this. I don't have time for that. See you later. That was a learning experience.
Great experience.
Absolutely. I'm very grateful for that experience because that experience made me realize that, okay, maybe the way I was going about it wasn't going to deliver value to that individual in that conversation. I need to adjust my course.
Yeah. That's the very wise attitude too, because you didn't take that
I got pretty pissed back then.
But it sounds like it didn't end up in, that's my third rejection. I give up. I'm just going to go back and make pizzas and that's it. So you took that lesson and thought, okay, analyze how it went wrong and how I can make it better. And then my next one is going to.
I'm looking back on that experience 20 years on.
Sure. Yeah, I know. I appreciate that.
Back then, it was not a very pleasant experience, but I had to have those hits and go through those hits before I could then say, right, I want to do this. Because if we go back to our chronological kind of process, by 2006, I had sold enough sites that I knew that, okay, this is the process for selling a site. My initial entry into becoming a real estate agent was never to be a real estate agent. It was always to be, how do I learn about property development as a process without investing much money into it.
Mhm.
I'll be on the side of hundreds and thousands of projects that I'm going to see, and I can see things that work. I can see things that don't work. I can see what they did to make them work, and I can make some money in the process. Great idea. By 2006, I had a friend that said, well, why don't you come along and work as a buyer's advocate? So this is flipping the script.
Yeah.
How do you now go and buy development sites for clients? I thought, great, next part in my learning. Because it's not only about selling the site, it's also about buying the site. And in fact, that gentleman was another mentor that pretty much defined that you make your profit when you buy. By the time you'd bought, if you'd overpaid, if you're at the other end of the process and you're about to sell, but you bought really badly, you'll be hoping to hell that you're actually going to make any money out of that thing. So, yeah, it was great. For 2 years, I went and bought lots of sites. And then the next point was realizing that actually the property developers that were successful, that I'd met hundreds of them, the ones that were able to navigate the cycles, and inevitably music stops, comes around every single time there is a cycle, they better have something to be able to hold on. And that something was a very effective business. So first and foremost, there were successful business people that had machines working for them in terms of the overall process, and lots of people and all kinds of things going around. And then property development was a side product.
Right. So this is where the birth of Eagle Vision?
That was pretty much it.
Okay.
So
So
this was pretty much it.
This is to fill in the gaps and the lulls of the cycle.
Correct.
Right.
Correct. Because by that time, I'd given up on owning a restaurant. I'd given up on, selling art door to door. That wasn't going to cut it. And I went back to my own first principles. I went back to the degrees that I studied, the fact that I had done industrial design, that I learned how to solve problems through engineering.
Yeah.
Here is this problem. In the marketplace, there's a whole bunch of pictures that aren't working. There's a whole bunch of property developers spending a lot of money putting things out there that either look really flashy but don't actually deliver a result, or are really bad quality renders. And I don't know who and why they thought those renders would be capable of translating the vision of this developer of how their project is going to look when it's completed. So it was actually a bit of a roundabout way, but the way I went about it was amazing because I had a ready-made network. So from day dot, we had projects.
Yeah, great traction straight away.
It was immediate. Yeah. It wasn't like we had to learn how to get these people. I'd already had developed enough skills to build enough relationships. I had enough people trusting me that we would do the right thing for them. It was just a matter of getting the tactics right. And the tactics were technology, because technology changes all the time. In our world, which is a very slow-moving world of property development, there's a lot of glitz and glamour that comes in. There's a lot of tech that keeps changing, augmented reality, virtual reality, AI, all these different things. And a developer has to have a very clear mind and be able to decipher, okay, if I implement this technology, is it actually going to achieve the result? Most of the time, those guys were getting it wrong. And I thought there's got to be a better way. So that's where Eagle Vision was born. We had aimed at essentially working through as many projects as we could. The idea was just pump through volume, understand how that works. And at the same time, I think that was the beginning of my business coaching kind of learning. And the fact that there are these people that are or have been in business and they're prepared to coach somebody else.
Yes.
And hopefully help them achieve the result that they want. So it was a matter of then also working out who I'm going to listen to. There are, just like life coaches, thousands of business coaches. Some of them have done it before, some of them haven't. To get a qualification as a business coach probably doesn't take very long. But there were some really awesome people that I got to work with over those years. And one thing that I then realized was actually it was between my ears where all of the business coaching would work or not work. And so if I'd stopped listening to that particular business coach, it was time to move on.
Right.
But also, it was more about me. It was more about whether I was prepared to go and implement the things that this business coach was asking me to do. And perhaps in what they've been able to achieve, this would actually work. But it was ultimately up to my
It's always up to
mindset.
It's always execution, isn't it?
Of course.
You know,
of course.
because we get this information from everywhere, but until we implement,
Correct.
complete waste of time.
Correct.
But it's
and there has to be a feedback loop.
Yes.
Because we have to be able to implement something, come back to that point and think, all right, did that work? How well did it work? If it didn't work, then what can we do differently? How much are we prepared to commit to that work? And so, from day dot, I tried to get myself into a place where I had a business coach or an advisor of sorts. Even though my mentors at the time were saying, why do you need a coach? I'd been able to achieve success without a coach. And one of those gentlemen, he had some pretty radical upbringing in terms of having to succeed. His father passed away when he was 4. His mum developed cancer when he was 12. So he was an only child. And at the time when I met him, he had just sold the largest pharmacy group to a superannuation fund. It was just him and his wife living in a house. Some of their commercial properties that they kept were bringing in income to cover 6 families' lifestyle, not just one. And so for him, it was beyond that kind of the requirement of achieving financial success. He got there. He got way, way beyond it. And it was interesting learning from some of these guys because they said, why do you need a business coach? Well, I thought I needed one. Whether you may or may not have is your choice. So, I've worked with them for a while. We've got a group that we're working with right now. They're achieving results. It's been good.
Yeah, fantastic. I'm just getting a bit conscious of time, but before we wrap it up, I'd like to delve into teams. You've created a very unique team across multiple continents.
Sure.
And maybe you could just talk us through what the structure of that is and some of the pluses and the drawbacks of doing that.
Yeah, certainly. So from the beginning, I'd read a book. There's another one called 4 Hour Work Week.
Oh, yes.
It's one of these kind of classics. And the gentleman came across a concept of leverage. And it's a very, very simple concept. He's like, imagine if you're paid in dollars, you're paying in pesos, and you're living on yen or whatever another different currency is. So achieving a way to distribute the production team, achieving a way to leverage the time differences, and accessing talent that is far beyond what is currently available in the marketplace.
Yeah.
Those were the keys that I wanted to achieve. Because as long as we were able to quality control, provide the right product, then being able to do all those kinds of things made perfect sense to me. That allowed me to then have a machine that operated wherever I was geographically.
Yeah.
And it could work if I was in one location or another location, and it would be able to be operated. So that was the concept. Lots and lots of drawbacks. Lots and lots of minefields along the way of learning that. But the amazing gifts that we've had because of that exercise over the last 16 years was the various cultures we've come across and we've worked with and we're continuing to support. One of the visions for the company was to basically empower people worldwide to live the life that they want to live.
Yeah, and I recently read the article, the one that you wrote about the lady. Was it a lady from the Philippines?
Yeah.
I can't remember too much of what I was read and what we talked about behind the scenes, so I don't want to talk too much to it just in case. But that, and then you've got some of your staff are in Ukraine.
Sure.
I remember you talking about when everything was going down 3 years ago, all of the issues with that, and then you've actually been able to bring a Ukrainian lady out and working within your business here in Adelaide. And it's just I'd imagine that's very rewarding
Absolutely.
We've come full circle through this story of your upbringing in
That's right.
Georgia, and then to know what these people are going through, and then to pull them up now that you're in a position to do that. I think that must just feel incredible.
Yeah, it was. And when that opportunity came up to employ someone like that, that was exactly how it felt. That it was that giving back or paying back to the friends that had sponsored us and gave us money for a flight across, and giving that leg up to someone that has the chip on the shoulder, and goes back to that same principle of how do we find people that want to be with us. It's much more important that they're Warren Buffett talks about this, where if you've got a person that typically have three attributes, they're intelligent, they're capable, and they're honest. And if you have someone that has only two of those attributes, then you better watch out, because you might have someone who's intelligent and capable and you'll be in big trouble. So finding those people with those three attributes in one go is incredibly rare. And nurturing people like that, finding people like that. We've worked with some of our guys and girls for over 10 years. Some of them are still in the conflict zone. We talked to them about that. Some of them had left the conflict zone, and we've been able to continue working with them whilst they're relocated to another part of the world. So life continues as long as it can.
Well, that's interesting, because I've thought about this myself, and what concerns as my fear is the lack of continuity if you have remote staff. Some of that obligation that staff a person would have for their employer, some of that loyalty is built up in the relationship of going and saying hello every day and face to face. If you don't have that in another country, there's a level of engagement which helps to bind us to our role that's missing. So I would have thought that the risk of someone being fickle in the role, today I want to do this, but there's another opportunity from some other online person coming up and I get $1 more, or it can diminish the onus on that person to their loyalty. Is that been an issue?
Absolutely. It's an issue. And that's when it comes back to those three attributes.
Yeah.
If you get someone who's intelligent and capable.
Yeah.
Because what we've been able to find are relationships with people that actually we care for as humans.
That's the key. It's not an online person. It's a person.
Yeah. They're living their life.
Yeah.
We're supporting them in living their life, whether they're next to us or they're across the continent. One of our render artists is in Russia. One of our modelers in Ukraine is in Ukraine. They need to work together because there's a project that involves them communicating to each other. They're on the opposite sides of the fence. Yeah. And so having to deal with humans, having to take politics out of those conversations and being a moderator of sorts.
That's incredible.
It's a pathway.
So your next role was with the UN?
Yeah. Well, no thanks. No thanks. No, it'll take me away from doing the Ironman.
Yeah. that brings me to my last point. Just like to share people's hobbies and things that they do, but I know that you have this amazing goal to achieve an Ironman. Can you tell people what an Ironman is versus being, doing a marathon?
Yeah, sure thing. So an Ironman triathlon is defined as swimming for 3.8 kilometers in the ocean. They then cycle for 180 kilometers on a bike. And then after that, you run for 42.2 kilometers.
Sounds so much fun.
It's great fun. Fabulous fun.
Is there a Tin Man version of that?
There are lots of versions of that. There are some versions that actually extend those distances because some people clearly don't have enough to do with their life, right? Clearly. But the very simple reason why I thought that was a worthwhile goal to push for was back in 2012 or thereabouts, I was in a business coaching environment. And in that group session, the coach said, do you have any fitness or physical challenges that you want to achieve. And back then I was swimming in a swimming pool about 2 kilometers at a time, just doing laps, because I found that was really relaxing because of all the stress of the work that I had to deal with. And so before that, if we go back probably about 10 or so years before, I was caught up in a rip in Bondi, just out in the ocean. And I was like, oh, crap, I'm not moving very far. And in fact, I'm being pulled back out. So how do I get myself out of this sticky situation? I had to put my hand up, and Lifesaver came around and got me out of that thing. And a friend of mine who was a better swimmer, who was with me at the time, he was like, you okay? Blah, blah. He tried to help, but he couldn't. So that was a big psychological trauma for me to push through. And so when that coach asked me the question about physical challenges, I said to him, swimming pier to pub. So pier to pub is this classic ocean race in Victoria, down at Portsea. They swim, in Lorne. They swim from the pier to the pub. It's about a 1,200 meter swim. And you just have to navigate through ocean.
Do you get a beer at the end? Or?
You get a pub meal probably at the end.
I prefer the Hills version, which is drive home to pub and then pub to home.
Sure. So that to me was like this one thing that, hey, maybe breaking through the fear of swimming in open water, that could become kind of cool. And this business coach said he's been running marathons. Athletically, I'd been doing athletics when I was young, and he did not look like the most athletic person out there, but he was doing marathons. And I was like, why are you doing that? And he said, well, it's actually the best business training you could ever do. To me, that really stuck out. How is that possible that he's doing this and then it translates to something else in another part of his life? And so the story goes that I was, as soon as I committed to that goal, because he went around the table and said, what are all of your goals? And I said, that's what I want. A lady next to me said, oh, I can introduce you to a swimming coach. He'll teach you how to swim open water.
The teacher appears.
There it is. And so I thought, all right, I better follow through on that. So I grabbed the number of the guy and went in, and I met this group of people. And there's a very unique type of people. Unless you've actually been exposed to them, you'll never really come across them. It's a very tightly held community. And they just seem to be happy. They seem to be purposeful. They seem to have things going on for them that made them look forward and made them interested in life. And most of these guys and ladies were much older than me. I like shortcuts. I like to look for things where there's a way there that perhaps is an answer and perhaps an insight into that somebody else has uncovered that makes sense, that I should follow along that road. And so that stuck out to me. So one thing that they were all doing were some kind of endurance events. I'd played lots of impact sports. I played lots of basketball growing up. So knees, ankles, back, all of those kind of issues. Right. Picking up a basketball was not an option because I had to turn up to work the next day and I'd be out. So,
gotcha.
And being fairly competitive, it also then struck my other side of it that swimming with these older women and men, they were so much quicker than me.
Right.
It was like, how does that work? So, long story short, 10 years on or thereabouts, 12 years actually, I'd set myself a goal to do this Ironman triathlon by the age of 40.
Yeah, I remember when you announced it.
Yeah. So now 40 came and went because to train for one of these events is quite a commitment in its own. I was building a business, was certainly not the time, young family growing up. My time was much more valuable and important to be spent in that area. So I thought, all right, I'll put it off, wait until I'm 50. About 2 years ago or thereabouts, a birthday came and went, and I was like, right, I said that I'm going to do this triathlon thing. I was swimming and I was running. I'd done a bunch of marathons. I swam Portsea, and I swam Peter Pub, and I'd swum a couple of races that were actually longer than the distance for the Ironman triathlon. So those were fine. I thought I can manage those. The bike bit, how do I work on that? That was the last missing piece. And so as soon as I kind of said, well, 50 is 4 years away, I better fulfilled and get on with it. And so I registered for a 70.3 Ironman. That's half the distances of the full triathlon in Busselton in WA back in 2023. And a friend of mine who was doing Ironmans at the time, he said, get yourself a coach. I thought that's probably good advice. I went out and found a group that was being coached. There were a couple of coaches there, and I thought, right, they have the right attitude. Some groups in triathlon are all about number one because it is quite a selfish exercise because it is all about completing and winning and that side of it. But we're all going through a fair bit of pain. And to complete and push through and finish and do all those kinds of things, if one doesn't have a peer group, if one doesn't have support, it makes it so much more difficult. Not having a coach, it's almost like throwing it out to the wind and hoping to hell that it works. And I'd been injured many times before that, trying to complete a race and then having to pull out of doing it. So, that was sensible advice. So I followed through with that. And earlier this year, after having completed a couple of Ironman 70.3 triathlons, was the time that I could actually say, yep, I'm ready to do the full one. Wow. So 7th of December this year, Busselton, WA.
Right. Wow. You'll be there.
Hopefully I'll be on the start line.
I'd like to say good luck, but I don't think it's coming down to good luck. I think it's coming down to good planning and
there's a lot of
self-determination, perseverance and strength of character. So that's inspiring.
Which are all the attributes required to build a business.
I was going to say, I mean, that's if there's anything that's come through this whole conversation today, it's that it's you don't do anything without consideration. Like you don't jump into anything without considering what's the benefit.
I used to jump into lots of things without considering. Burned my hands many times on those things. Made lots and lots of mistakes, and I definitely encourage that young person to try things. They have to try things. Failure is not an option; it's a necessity. And it's not a luxury, it's an essential to success. Without that attribute, without pushing through, without experiencing, without saying, all right, this person has a theory, let's put it into practice. Give it a crack.
Same as raising little children. You want your little children to fail at something. If you run too fast and on the gravel and you skin your knees, well, there's a good lesson to not to stop running on gravel, but to get better footwear.
Sure.
So you can choose one of those two paths. So
absolutely.
Let's teach our kids to make sure they've got the right footwear to run on gravel.
There's a speaker or a book that I'd read this where essentially every Friday or every family dinner, the father would ask the family, actually I remember where it's from, the lady who built Spanx. So she is a self-made billionaire, Sarah Blakely. And her father, while raising them, would ask them what they failed at during the week. He would then encourage and celebrate failure. He would celebrate the fact that they tried something new. They didn't succeed at it, but they learned incredible lessons out of doing those things. So then again, bringing out the insights and the distinctions of those experiments, it's absolutely essential.
Yeah. Stan, that's a really beautiful place to end it, I think. So thank you so much for your time today, and thanks for joining us on Tales from the Top.
Stan.
Absolutely.
Great talking to you.
Really appreciate the lessons, or the questions, in fact, because the questions, they're the bits that draw out all those lessons over the years. So thank you.
Thank you. To the listeners, I hope that you enjoyed that as much as we did. Thanks for listening to the show. And if you'd like to find out more about Chiron Audio or Devison Design and how we can create bespoke luxury environments and experiences in your life, you're more than welcome to book a call with one of our principals through our websites, chironaudio.com.au or devisondesign.com.au. or follow us on our socials. Links are in the description.